LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 3rd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be showing you the 10 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see, the big topic is the end of the Supreme Court term and another Supreme Court term that has shown us a right-wing Supreme Court setting back the United States in terms of many years of progress on important issues that have made us a more inclusive, equal, fair society. And thanks to 3 Trump appointees and the antics of a Republican Senate, we have a 6-3 very conservative majority. And so the main topic of most of the news analysis shows this week was the way the Supreme Court set back the United States in terms of racial justice, LGBTQ rights. There was also a discussion of the student loan case, which I think is kind of in a separate category, as I'll discuss later when I get to the news summaries. But for my political comedy, I always like to find some political comedy. And, you know, with the writer's strike, there's no Saturday Night Live, there's no Real Time with Bill Maher, there's no, no one is writing political comedy, but it still kind of shows up. And I take what I can get for. They made some jokes on Fox News Sunday. First, there are multiple levels of bias in this Fox News clip here. First, they really like to, I never saw this before the Biden administration, but they really like to focus on airport problems, like traveling problems. And that might be because we have a gay Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and I'll have a clip of him later talking about LGBTQ rights. But they really like to demonize Pete Buttigieg for not doing his job and taking parental leave at one point, because he's in a gay marriage and all that. And maybe that's why they concentrate on all these travel problems. Although, to be fair, I will show the news summary from CBS News Face the Nation a little bit later that where their top story was flight delays over July 4th weekend, but that's because they had Pete Buttigieg on as their guest, and that's a whole different kind of bias I'll talk about then. But I found this amusing, this discussion. It turns into a discussion about marijuana policy, where most of the people are just saying, Shannon Bream, the host of Fox News Sunday, actually quotes the Nancy Reagan "just say no" thing, and Richard Fowler is the only person on the left on this panel, and he gives off a really strong vibe as maybe the only one on the panel who has ever smoked marijuana, which, anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the political comedy clip from Fox News Sunday together over here.
They delayed it, and then they delayed it, and then eventually at 4 a.m. they said it was canceled.
This is 2 hours on the phone, and they're finally giving me at least a refund for my original flight, but I had to book another $900 flight for my partner and I to go back home in 2 days. 2 days from now.
Oh, just a sampling of the frustrations people across the country are facing this week at airports. That irritation, increasing tensions in the middle of a potentially record-breaking holiday weekend. We are back with our panel. Anybody flying this weekend in the next couple of days?
An hour and 5 minutes.
Good luck, Tammy. Good luck. Penny, where do we go with this? There have been some measures on the Hill to try to get more consumer protection. Fast Company reporting about this says among the suggested rights for travelers is the proposal that weather cannot be used as an excuse for delays and cancellations that are actually the fault of the airline. But House and Senate haven't voted on this, meaning none of this is going to help you this week.
Well, and Secretary Buttigieg blamed some of this on weather, and it probably is some of it weather, but there's a couple of other issues happening. The FAA has not updated its equipment, and we need to concentrate on that. Apparently, there's more appropriations coming that way to work on that. But also, there's shortages of personnel. And I spoke with a pilot yesterday, and he was saying for the airlines, the issue is them being able to pass a random drug test.
Oh.
Because Pot comes up in the test. They cannot work for the airlines, so the proliferation of drug use in our country is not good for your employment. So the takeaway is don't do drugs, kids.
Okay, just say no. I'm very Nancy Reagan, 1980s. Richard, how worried are you about your flight tomorrow? Who do you blame?
Listen, I think this is an interesting situation, right? I think part of it is we need to modernize our air traffic control system. We need to hire more air traffic controllers. I also think we need to figure out a way to hire more folks to work at airlines. If the problem is that we're drug testing for cannabis, then we should have a conversation when.
Do you want your pilot stoned while they're piloting you to wherever you're going?
I think it's one thing about being high on the job, another thing about having cannabis in your system over a month-long period. I think those are two different questions and two different debates.
Doug?
Well, I'll err on the side of not being Cheech and Chong on my flights. But
Wasn't there a movie about that?
Yes, I think so.
Fly a plane and there was smoke coming out. Yeah.
Soul Plane. Yes, that was a good movie. So I took the train yesterday back to Washington. We arrived 2 minutes earlier. But as
by the way, that last right-wing commentator, his name is Doug Heye, the one who brought up Cheech and Chong. His name is Doug Heye. I'm not making that up. It's spelled Heye, but that is his name. And the movie Soul Plane, though, was not Cheech and Chong. I don't know. Was Shannon Bream thinking about like Up in Smoke, where the Cheech and Chong van is like smoking and on fire? Was there a Cheech and Chong airplane movie? Not where the airplane? I don't think so. But Soul Plane, that's like Snoop Dogg was the pilot, and a whole different thing than Cheech and Chong. But I don't know about the bias there that I was talking about. I took a little screenshot there I wanted to share with you that sort of backs up what I was saying about the way they demonize Pete Buttigieg on Fox News when they had that one woman there, Penny Nance from Conservative Women of America, who started the whole marijuana discussion with some like unsourced rumor when she was talking about problems with the FAA. This was the shot there. Like, she's in a little box, and Pete Buttigieg, is it because he's a possible like successor to Biden, or because he's gay, or why did they like focus on all this transportation stuff with Pete Buttigieg on Fox News and demonize him? I don't really understand that. You can let me know what you think about Richard Fowler, who knew that like you don't have to be high to have marijuana in your system. It's in there for like a month or whatever, and taking, a fact-based approach. That's why he's like the one liberal who brings facts onto the Fox News discussion panel. But I mean, the rest of it, the just say no and don't do drugs, kids, from the Conservative Women of America woman, and I don't know. They all did not have the same fact-based approach as Richard Fowler, I guess. And anyway, that was the political comedy clip. Now I'm going to show you the news summaries, and usually I go from longest to shortest, but I just to counteract, or as a sort of rebuttal to my critique of Fox News right there, the news summary from CBS News Face the Nation actually focused as for the top story on the flight delays over the 4th of July weekend. So maybe it wasn't biased from Fox News to focus on that, although I often say that the all of the corporate news media has this bias for their exclusive guests, and that's different from partisan bias. And on Face the Nation, their exclusive guest was Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. I'm going to show a clip from him later talking about the Supreme Court and free speech versus LGBTQ rights. But here's the actually the shortest of the news summaries from Face the Nation, talking about what they were just talking about in the political comedy clip from Fox News over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. On this 4th of July weekend, the flight cancellations and delays that have plagued travelers all the last week have eased, but there are new threats of bad weather that will likely impact return flights. And it's not just the severe weather, which has been and will continue to be exacerbated by climate change. It's problems with staffing shortages, including air traffic controllers, airline, and TSA personnel. There have been almost 7,500 cancellations and more than 50,000 delayed flights in the last week. We begin today with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
And yeah, there's the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, and I don't know, is that really the top story of the week? The flight delays over 4th of July weekend. That's this bias of a journalistic bias towards exclusive guests I was talking about. Kind of different from the way Fox News is like totally covering anything that breaks down in terms of transportation, so they can, of course, demonize Pete Buttigieg, who you can tell me, why is Pete Buttigieg a Fox News whipping boy? You can draw your own conclusions. I think I kind of said what mine are, and I'm going to show you now the rest of the news summaries from longest to shortest. One thing, and these all except for Meet the Press focus on the Supreme Court decisions as the last end of term Supreme Court decisions, which are usually the most divisive. They hold them up until the end of the term because it takes the longest to get them out. And so I think that was probably the biggest story of the week, more important than travel delays on 4th of July weekend. Meet the Press doesn't cover it because I've been talking about this for several weeks. It looks like Chuck Todd kind of like phoned it in. He like, for all we know, this was recorded several days ago. Even though Chuck Todd in his news summary has a Democratic and Republican senator on, never asked them about any of the Supreme Court decisions, which happened on Thursday, so you would think they would know about it, but no. But I'll talk about that when I get to Meet the Press. This is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I mean, one thing I'll criticize, well, I've talked for quite a bit here, so I have some criticism of all the coverage, especially on the Colorado woman who didn't want to make a gay wedding website, the LGBTQ rights decision that I don't think has been covered very well in most of the media. And I'll talk about that maybe a little more after we watch the first of the news summaries covering these issues from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's Jon Karl in as the host this week, and then Devin Dwyer reporting from the Supreme Court. They start off with poll results about how the Supreme Court's doing poorly in public opinion polls. And there's more to it. By the way, down in the video description, I put short summaries of all the clips, including this one, clip 3, the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, a brand new ABC News Ipsos poll shows that Americans increasingly view the Supreme Court as political. A majority now say they believe that the justices rule mainly on the basis of politics and not the law. This after the court's conservative supermajority upended years of precedent with decisions that will have a lasting impact. The court was predictably praised by Republicans and condemned by Democrats. But despite the headline-grabbing decisions, and despite the majority view that the justices are acting mainly based on politics, the Supreme Court this term was significantly less divided than you may think. Consider this. More than half of the court's decisions this term were unanimous or nearly so, either 9-0 or 8-1. 9 out of 10 decisions had at least one of the court's liberal justices in the majority. In other words, less than 1 out of every 10 were decided by a 6-3 margin, with all 6 Republican-appointed justices in the majority. And on some major cases, the court's rulings reassured liberals and disappointed conservatives. The court flatly rejected the idea, pushed by allies of President Trump, that state legislatures have total control over federal elections. It also upheld a key component of the Voting Rights Act, and it rejected a Republican-led challenge to President Biden's immigration and deportation policies. But in some of the most consequential rulings of the term, especially regarding affirmative action, there is no doubt that the court's solid conservative majority is making its mark. And that's where we begin with ABC's Devin Dwyer at the Supreme Court.
A Supreme Court term with surprising consensus ended with explosive decisions, striking down President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, creating an exception to anti-discrimination laws for free speech, and after 45 years, ending affirmative action in higher education. The court's internal fault lines, deeply personal on matters of race, spilled out into the open. Justice Clarence Thomas, who's acknowledged benefiting from affirmative action, blasted the program as flying in the face of our colorblind Constitution. Justice Sonia Sotomayor firing back that ignoring racial inequality will not make it disappear. And Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson even more biting, accusing Thomas and the majority of let them eat cake obliviousness.
I do think we have to be prepared for less diverse campuses in the short term.
For some Asian American students who have felt disadvantaged in the elite college admissions process, it was vindication. At Harvard, between 1995 and 2013, Asian American applicants had the highest average SAT scores of any racial group, but the lowest acceptance rate.
Affirmative action is a well-intentioned idea that is poorly executed in reality.
The nation's most selective colleges and universities are now scrambling for a new approach.
For many, this decision feels deeply personal. It means the real possibility that opportunities will be foreclosed. But at Harvard, it has also strengthened our resolve to continue opening doors.
9 states had banned affirmative action before the court's decision and may offer clues to what's ahead. At UCLA, the student body was 7% black in 1996. A decade later, after race was outlawed as an admissions factor, it was 2%. But California schools have largely retained highly diverse student bodies when it comes to race.
Every school will find a way to adapt. They will find a way to meet the burden of diversifying their campuses in their own way.
Some schools are considering an end to legacy admissions or even early decision programs seen as giving advantage to white applicants. Others are encouraging students to talk about issues of race in their essays.
The student has to be able to connect the race to something that they have realized about themselves.
German and Yariel Ortega, first-generation college students from Queens, say it's time the process was overhauled.
It's sad that I got a full ride because I'm Hispanic, because they needed to give because they needed to give that scholarship to Hispanic, and ironically, I was.
But it's good for you.
Oh, it's good for me, but it says a lot.
And Devin joins me now from the Supreme Court. Devin, you have been in the chamber throughout this term. You have met with each of the justices. Is it your sense that they are keenly aware of the controversy surrounding the court? Are they worried at all about the perception?
Yeah, no question, John. I mean, the justices like to say they don't decide cases based on public opinion, but they certainly aren't blind to it. And Chief Justice John Roberts has made defending the legitimacy of the court his top priority. He's got an ally in Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And those two justices, John, were most in the majority this term 95% of the time. John.
Thank you, Devin. I'm joined now by Sherilyn Ifill, who leads the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, so sorry, I was trying to get the Devin Dwyer was the reporter there, and one important thing he reported on there at the last 10 seconds was something I actually used for my political comedy. I think it was a Dahlia Lithwick clip on one of the Jonathan Capehart weekend shows where they were talking about how, like, the center of the court now is Brett Kavanaugh. Justice Brett Kavanaugh is actually the center of this 9-justice, this 6-3 ultra-conservative right-wing court. But Roberts has, like, brought Kavanaugh along to join with the liberal justices, the 3, and they're not even all that liberal other than maybe Ketanji Brown Jackson. They're more like centrist justices compared to the right-wing court that we have now. That's what makes it all so ridiculous that Brett Kavanaugh would be the center of anything. And I'm not going off on my Justice Brett Kavanaugh rant, but he lied his way onto the Supreme Court. I talked about that many times, and I'm not going to discuss it now because I don't want to add another 10 minutes to the length of this video. But what I do want to discuss that wasn't in that pretty good report. Oh, that one thing I really liked about that report from Devin Dwyer there on ABC, was they talked about what's happened when they got rid of affirmative action in California. In 1996, we had this state proposition that in public universities like UCLA said you can't use race as a factor. They're not racial quotas. It's not like letting letting anyone in who's not qualified because of race. It's like using race as a factor to decide between qualified applicants, which is what affirmative action is or was before the Supreme Court struck it down for colleges and universities. Well, anyways, since 1996, as you saw in that report, black enrollment at UCLA has gone from 7% to 2%. So what does that tell you in terms of, you can make all the philosophical arguments you want, but if you want to see the real world results, that's the whole point of affirmative action, trying to be colorblind in order to fix the past effects of racism is impossible because you can't fix racial discrimination without looking at that number. You've gone from 7% to 2%. So you look at race to see like what are your policies resulting in, and if you don't look at race, you don't know that the enrollment at UCLA has gone from 7% to 2% or whatever. That you can't fix racial discrimination without looking at what's happening in terms of race. So that is not a tangent, but the other criticism I have of all the coverage on these big five corporate outlets of the LGBTQ case was also evident in this ABC description. You saw the Devin Dwyer here in his report on the Supreme Court case of this Colorado woman who had never made a wedding website, but who, like, hypothetically might want to make wedding websites, and so she didn't want to have to do it for same-sex couples. They didn't want to make websites for their gay marriages or whatever, and so Devin Dwyer in that report called that the Supreme Court made an exception to anti-discrimination laws for free speech. But I don't know if that's really an accurate description. And one thing that wasn't covered in that report or any of these reports you're going to see is that there was a really bogus basis for that entire lawsuit, because in order to make a federal lawsuit, there's something you need called standing. You have to prove you were injured. There has to be a case in controversy, not like some hypothetical harm that might happen. And this woman had never made a wedding website. And not only did she like make up the harm that had never happened to her, but apparently they made up like a person who was like asking for a wedding website and who never really did. They took a real person and made up this story. This is something I put under sources in the video description. This New Republic article that came out a few days ago by Melissa Gira Grant, titled "The Supreme Court Doesn't Care That the Gay Wedding Website Case is Based on Fiction." And it's not only the standing issue that the woman in Colorado was not even injured, but if you look at the paragraph, this New Republic reporter actually interviewed someone who, here's the paragraph from that story. They claimed that Smith, Laurie Smith, the plaintiff, who didn't want to make the gay wedding website, she said in sworn statements and filings submitted to the Supreme Court that she received an inquiry from a same-sex couple named Stuart and Mike to build them a wedding website. There was contact information included in the inquiry in the lawsuit, and then this reporter called Stuart. Not only did he have no idea he was named in a filing to upend an anti-LGBTQ discrimination law, he told me he never made this inquiry, and it turns out that he's married to a woman. He's not even gay. The whole thing was based on bogus facts, but it made it all the way to the conservative Supreme Court because the most ultra right-wing conservative Supreme Court justices don't care about the facts. They proved that in the case last term, where they upheld the rights of this football coach who supposedly was like praying alone after football games, but there were all these pictures of him praying with all his students. And they like changed the facts to reach the results they wanted. And then like the Alliance Defending Freedom is one of these right-wing legal groups that I've been following for 20, 30 years that are really dishonest in the way that they approach the law. I always find mistakes in the press releases they put out. I've had personal interactions with some Christian lawyers that, like, is that what Jesus would do? Like lie to get a ruling that you want? No, I don't think so. But you can let me know what you think in the comment section as I move on to my next news summary. And this one is actually the NBC News Meet the Press one I talked about earlier, where it looks like Chuck Todd phoned it in. He has on a Republican and a Democratic senator, doesn't ask either of them about any of the breaking news from the Supreme Court, never mentions the Supreme Court anywhere in this special edition of Meet the Press where they're talking about the fentanyl crisis, which, 100,000 Americans dead a year. That's not an unimportant story, but it almost seems like, and I've talked about this multiple times in the last month and a half, where Chuck Todd is like phoning it in or like pre-recording the program. And then he always says if it's Sundays, Meet the Press, and some Sundays they preempt the program. And anyway, I guess Chuck Todd is ending his hosting of the program in September. So he's taken all his vacation days now or something. But you could not prove to me that this wasn't recorded before the Supreme Court made its decisions on Thursday, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this, an important issue analysis on not the most newsworthy topic of the weekend over here.
A good Sunday morning. It is 100 times more powerful than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. The DEA calls fentanyl the single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. What was once an obscure drug to treat pain in end-stage cancer patients has become the leading cause of death for American adults under the age of 50. When President Richard Nixon launched America's war on drugs 52 years ago, annual overdose deaths stood at 6,771. Last year, overdose deaths rose to more than 110,000. That's almost half the number of Americans who died simply from COVID. And deaths from synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl, accounted for nearly 70% of those overdose deaths. The opioid overuse epidemic began in the late 90s, driven then by the overprescribing of opioids to treat pain, while drug manufacturers like Purdue Pharma, which has recently paid an $8.3 billion federal settlement in 2020, profited from this problem. By 2010, heroin deaths began rapidly increasing. And then beginning in 2013, it was overdose deaths increasingly involved synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Fentanyl precursor chemicals are made in China and to a lesser extent also in India. And they're shipped to Mexico, where they're then pressed into pills to look like prescription drugs. And it's primarily being done by two powerful drug cartels, Sinaloa and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. China and Mexico are not willing partners with the United States. China formally severed any counter-narcotics collaboration after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the island of Taiwan in 2022. And then last week, the Justice Department filed the first ever charges against Chinese companies they believe are responsible for manufacturing precursor chemicals.
Stopping the Chinese chemical companies that are supplying the cartels with the building blocks they need to manufacture deadly fentanyl. We are targeting every step of the movement, manufacturing and sale of fentanyl from start to finish.
And U.S.-Mexico cooperation on drug trafficking has collapsed under this current Mexican president, López Obrador, known as AMLO, who has denied that fentanyl is even produced in Mexico. And then he lashed out at the United States for spying and, quote, interference after 28 members of the Sinaloa cartel were charged in April. Last year, the DEA seized over 79 million deadly doses of fentanyl. It's more than double the amount it seized in 2021. And that's enough to supply a lethal dose to every single American. But officials estimate they are capturing maybe just 5 to 10% of the fentanyl that is crossing in from Mexico. And they acknowledge it could even be less than that. The drug is often found in fake pills. It's made to resemble prescription drugs like oxycodone, Xanax, and Adderall. And it's sent through the mail, marketed on the internet and social media, including to children and teens. This is a crisis that the United States has struggled to combat in any meaningful way. Since President Biden took office, his administration has launched a public health campaign known as One Pill Can Kill, warning about the fentanyl threat. And they're introducing new scanning technologies at border crossings. In theory, the fentanyl issue should be way above politics. But with Republican opponents hoping to use the issue as a wedge to blame Biden for border policies, the president has said very little publicly about the crisis.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. Big, you got it.
Obviously, that was from the State of the Union. The reality is that more than 90% of fentanyl seizures along the border this year have been at the legal U.S. ports of entry. And most of those involved with sneaking fentanyl across the border, U.S. citizens. Even the scope of the addiction crisis is not yet clear. More than 9 million Americans misused opioids in 2021, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. And yet the agency has not tracked the rise of fentanyl and does not know how many Americans are even using it. What's clear is that fentanyl is touching every part of American life and every demographic group.
An ex-friend of the family who sold drugs, gave her what she thought was an oxy and took half of it and never woke up. There's no second chances most of the time for fentanyl. You're either going to die or you're going to get addicted. That's just it.
If you know something, you need to say something. And if you can't say it, take care of it.
He had bought some of the blue oxy pills and taken a half of one and died within 1 minute.
And joining me now is Ann Milgram, administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration.
And I won't be showing you a clip of Ann Milgram or actually anyone else from Meet the Press, even though they had Ohio Senators J.D. Vance and Sherrod Brown on, both talking about the fentanyl crisis, but not anything having to do with my main topic of the Supreme Court, and nothing that would give any indication that this program was created any time in the last month, maybe. I don't know when they pre-recorded this, but it was definitely pre-recorded so they could take another weekend off, and it was Sunday and it wasn't really Meet the Press. Well, you can let me know what you think about that, but there was one good thing in there. They showed the big disagreement at the State of the Union where Biden talked about the fentanyl crisis, and that, Republicans were yelling, close the border and it's your fault. And Chuck Todd, and I hear that literally every day on Fox News. They talk about, whenever they talk about the Biden border crisis, which they usually do, they add in how it's killing 100,000 Americans through fentanyl. Well, you saw Chuck Todd at least give this rebuttal fact to that Republican argument. 90% of fentanyl seizures along the border this year have been at legal U.S. ports of entry, and most of those involved with sneaking fentanyl across the border, U.S. citizens. So it's not undocumented people illegally crossing. It's people drive, because if you want to get stuff across the border, you put it in a truck or something, and you hire someone who's already a U.S. citizen to get, because there's so many people go across the border all the time. I used to live in San Diego long ago, and have been to the border, and big long lines of cars. That's how you get things across the border. But I think that was in a Cheech and Chong movie, but that's a whole different thing. That was the van that went up in smoke. They snuck it across that border in a big long line of cars, and that's how you do it. See, it all comes full circle. But anyway, the next news summary I'm going to show you is the second to last one, the Fox News Sunday. It's back on the main topic, at least better than Meet the Press, covering a newsworthy topic, and it's the Supreme Court, and it's Shannon Bream, who is a lawyer. Keep that in mind when I criticize Shannon Bream a little bit later for her legal analysis talking to Nikki Haley. But this is Shannon Bream and Alexandria Hoff mostly talking about the Supreme Court rulings, and especially in a way that makes it look liberals versus conservatives and Fox News viewers should get riled up, which is kind of the point of some of this stuff. But they also do this weird thing where they start with unrest in France, like the left is rising up in France mostly about the retirement age, I think it is. But uh, it's almost like I I was almost waiting for them to blame Biden. This is all part of Biden's crime wave because and right afterwards they have Nikki Haley on, and it's the first question Shannon Bream asks, and she says we've had that unrest here and we need law and order. I think that's why they also include that in the Fox News Sunday news summary, which I pretty much pre-criticized, but we'll still talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. We begin this morning with striking images out of France, where protesters have clashed for days with police. There are new reports overnight that rioters reportedly targeted a mayor's home with a burning car, he says, injuring his wife and one of his children. This is the fifth night of unrest sparked by the police killing of a teenager. Police made more than 700 arrests nationwide. This is the country's worst social upheaval in years, and it poses new challenges to French President Emmanuel Macron. We will continue to bring you updates on that developing story as they come in. Now to the major story here in the U.S. this morning. In just the last year, the Supreme Court's conservative majority has delivered game-changing rulings on the nation's biggest cultural issues. Last summer, it was the end of Roe v. Wade. And this past week, the court struck down affirmative action in college admissions and President Biden's student debt relief plan. Conservatives have cheered the rulings. Progressives have expressed outrage, and some have said it's time for the president to expand the court. Advocates on all sides are looking ahead to 2024. In just a minute, we'll speak live with a Republican presidential candidate, Nikki Haley, who says the court got it right on affirmative action, student loans, and more. But first, we turn to Alexandria Hoff, live at the White House, with the latest on the president's reaction to the Supreme Court's decisions this week, at one point calling the court not normal. Alexandria.
Well, good morning, Shannon. That's right. The president used some strong phrasing to condemn the rulings and the court itself, calling the student loan decision unthinkable and wrong. But the White House says that it was prepared.
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
The president's last word on the last decision handed down by the Supreme Court this week, rounding out a trio of 6-3 blows to the Biden administration. On Friday, the court derailed the president's plan to use the 2003 HEROES Act to wipe out over $430 billion in student loan debt. Chief Justice Roberts citing a past statement by former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in his majority opinion.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not.
The three Democrat-appointed justices came to the plan's defense in their dissent. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called the court, quote, MAGA captured.
They ruled against it, 100% against it. Amazing.
At a campaign rally in South Carolina, former President Trump celebrated the court's decision as President Biden vowed to press forward with a new tactic to fulfill his 2020 campaign promise.
We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act.
And higher education itself also reeling Thursday when the court effectively ended the use of race-based affirmative action in college admissions. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote in her dissent, quote, deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. With Justice Clarence Thomas firing back, Justice Jackson's race-infused worldview falls flat at each step. The ideological divide was also clear Friday when the court ruled that a Colorado graphic designer's refusal to create certain LGBTQ-related expressive content was protected by the First Amendment. The dissenting opinion called it a setback for gay rights. For the Biden re-election campaign, the hope is that he can turn the legal losses into voter motivation. Now, the president expressed this week that he's also looking to turn around the term Bidenomics from something that was used somewhat negatively by opponents into a positive to sell his administration, and their economic policy. Shannon.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more coming up. Alexandria Hoff at the White House. Alex, thank you. Joining us now, Republican presidential candidate, former UN ambassador, and former Governor Nikki Haley. Governor.
And I will have a clip of that Nikki Haley interview, but not the first question, like I said, which goes back to the protests in France that Nikki Haley basically gives away the game from Fox News Sunday there, with they're really trying to talk about like the George Floyd protests and the people on the left who are bringing us chaos, and we have to respond with law and order, like the big Republican talking point you always see on Fox News. But otherwise, the report on the Supreme Court decisions wasn't incredibly biased by Alexandria Hoff. I mean, she did describe that LGBTQ rights decision pretty tendentiously by saying that this woman, Laurie Smith, this web designer, that she had she had a right to not have to create certain LGBTQ expressive content, I think is what she called it. I mean, if you like describe it that way, it really, I'm calling it tendentious because it gives you sort of the result that conservatives want. I mean, setting up a website for a gay wedding, is that really speech? I mean, I don't know. Is that something that where you're, I mean, all sorts of people do stuff for weddings. You know, if you're the caterer for a wedding and you're creating, or like say you're making a cake for a wedding, do all like cake makers or website designers, do they say, you know, I endorse this wedding, I know this couple and they should be getting married, and they're like, I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why you might not be most accepting of any particular wedding and might not think it's the greatest wedding, but just creating the website for it or the cake for it or catering or whatever, is that really LGBTQ expressive conduct or content? I don't know. I think that's tendentious. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. And then the final news summary. I mean, in some ways, this CNN State of the Union news summary was the best. I mean, ABC was pretty good, but CNN under a minute, and says the most important fact there, I guess, that these Supreme Court decisions are upending American life and moving America to the right. Moving America to the right. That's like the topic of my live stream this week, and so I have to give kudos to CNN for at least getting that. Maybe this is the best and shortest of the news summaries. I'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is divided 6-3. Key decisions by the Supreme Court this week once again upended American life with a trio of sweeping rulings that divided Americans and moved the country to the right, prompting far-reaching consequences that are only beginning to come into focus. The new decisions to gut affirmative action in college admissions, curtail LGBTQ protections, and block President Biden's controversial student loan forgiveness plan. It prompted blistering exchanges between justices on the court and brought the stakes in the 2024 election into clearer view, as top GOP candidates said if elected, they would push the nation even further on that path, while President Biden said only he can stand in their way. Here with me now is Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you so much.
Now, I mean, that was in some ways the best of the news summaries because it was so short, and I'm about to show you a clip of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez interview that Dana Bash gave, or the interview that Dana Bash did with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I actually have the clips here ordered from worst to best cross-examination of the interview subject, and Dana Bash is getting the worst award this week, even worse than Fox News, only because I have such low expectations from Fox News. But you just heard that Dana Bash, in her brief news summary there, let me make sure I've got exactly right what she said. She said in that news summary that there were really, where is it? I'm looking at the, blistering, yeah. There were blistering exchanges between justices on the court. So she knew that there were blistering exchanges, Dana Bash. She just reported on it. If you looked at ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, their news summary, there was like Clarence Thomas said something really negative about Ketanji Brown Jackson, like basically that she was saying all blacks were victims and she had like a victimhood mentality. But Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't really have the best things to say about Clarence Thomas. That's the really blistering exchanges that Dana Bash was talking about in the news summary. Yeah, here's on ABC, Ketanji Brown Jackson accused Clarence Thomas of let them eat cake obliviousness. We saw that in the ABC news summary. But in this next clip, you're going to see that Dana Bash lets Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez get away with saying that Clarence Thomas attacked Ketanji Brown Jackson personally, and Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't say anything personally about Clarence Thomas. Well, I mean, I think they're getting personal in both directions. That's weird. That's never happened before. A fly just landed on my camera. I don't know if it's actually going to crawl across the lens. It's on top of the lens. That's weird. That's never happened before. But yeah, like, so is this a personal attack on Clarence Thomas? I'm just waiting for that fly to, but yeah, Ketanji Brown, let them eat cake obliviousness. I think so. And Dana Bash, even though she said there was a blistering exchange that she apparently knew about, did not bring it up. So I'm criticizing CNN and I'm criticizing a left-wing icon, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For anyone who says that I only criticize the right, well, here I'm criticizing CNN and AOC and pretty much all the letters. Now, I'm not criticizing all the letters, but I'm just fascinated by this fly that's right over the lens of my camera. Is it going to crawl down? Is it going to crawl down? Sorry. I'll watch it and let you know after we watch that clip together over here.
Wow. I want to talk more broadly about the court in a minute, but first I want to ask about another decision this past week, striking down affirmative action programs. The two black justices on the court, Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, had a really blistering debate that we don't usually see in decisions. Here is part of what Justice Thomas wrote. He said, quote, Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims. Her desire to do so is unfathomable to me. It is an insult to individual achievement and cancerous to young minds seeking to push through barriers. Their race is not to blame for everything, good or bad, that happens in their lives. What is your response to that?
I mean, what Justice Clarence Thomas wrote there, I believe, is profoundly disrespectful. I just think it was profoundly disrespectful to his colleague. It includes sweeping assumptions about her worldview, whereas when you look at what the response was from Justice Ketanji Brown, we saw that her dissent was grounded in fact. It was grounded in the facts of the case. It did not disparage Clarence Thomas's overall worldview, but as a matter of fact, a nuanced critique of his analysis of the facts of the case. But for him to come out and insinuate that her opinion is due to some sort of inferior or less than really thought out of a stance, I think it's profoundly insulting. And I think that he really demonstrated his character, frankly, and his worldview in that critique himself.
Congresswoman, you've called on President Biden to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices. But even after Roe was overruled last year and this past week, what we saw with affirmative action and other cases, I want you to listen to what.
So yeah, then Dana Bash plays a clip of Biden saying he doesn't want to expand the Supreme Court, which I just kept playing that so you can see Dana Bash did no follow-up, even though at the beginning of that clip she even said blistering exchange between Thomas and Brown Jackson, and then she lets AOC get away with saying that it was Clarence Thomas attacked KBJ, but there was no attack from KBJ to Thomas. When, yeah, let them eat cake obliviousness. That, I mean, it's not quite ad hominem, but I wouldn't say it was like sticking to the facts and analysis of policy or whatever. But so that was my critique of that clip. Oh, and sorry, by the time I played that clip, the fly flew away, never crawled down. That would have been a great viral clip of like me talking with like a fly walking across my face, apparently. Oh, wait. So the fly's back. It's right there, but it's not on the camera. Well, maybe. We can always hope, because I don't like, this is the best I can do now that I don't have a Dash and Sandy clips. I can hope for a fly to walk across the lens. That this fly is my only pet. No, that's so sad. Anyway, I'm like getting off topic, and I want to get to the next clip, which is Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday, talking to presidential candidate in the Republican race, Nikki Haley, not really doing like at the beginning of the question. It almost sounds like she's going to ask her something that might make her say something controversial to be a Republican candidate, trying to get Republican primary vote, to say something. I was almost thinking she might make her say something in favor of LGBTQ rights, because she talks about the right to discriminate in the question. But then she like groups multiple issues together, and the question she asks is, well, are these issues going to hurt Republicans politically? Like maybe the Dobbs decision, the abortion rights decision last term, hurt Republicans politically. It's a political question. And then Nikki Haley doesn't answer the part about the right to discriminate against LGBTQ people. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Let's talk through some of the things you will face on the campaign trail and the debate stage. The Supreme Court decisions this week, Democrats actually say they show the court is dangerous. Former President Trump is out there saying, this shows my gift to the American people, the 3 justices I put into the court. Let's get some reaction on a couple of these. The first is that web designer who didn't want to do custom designs for things that conflict with her religious beliefs, including same-sex marriage. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said this: no person or business should be given a license to discriminate. That's exactly what today's wrong-headed Supreme Court decision will unleash. Court also struck down the president's student loan forgiveness plan, also ended race-based admissions into college. ATF President Randy Weingarten, reacting to both of those, said, between the affirmative action case and the decision on student debt, the court has decided that if you or your family has the ability and means, you can succeed. But if you're a struggler or a striver, you are on your own. So the president, the left, saying these decisions are not good for real Americans, people in protected classes, black and brown citizens, and potential applicants. Is there a danger here that Republicans run a risk? You won Dobbs last year. You win these legal battles, but they wind up hurting you politically.
This was a fantastic win for individual liberty and freedom. I think whether you look at the fact that, first of all, the Democrats are upset because things didn't go their way, but the people won. This is about empowering people and their rights. Whether it's making sure you're not picking winners and losers on whose loans you forgive, or whether it's the fact that you're deciding who gets into college based on a race that you can't control, whether it's the web designer. Look, gay people have the right to marry the same way a web designer has the right to say, according to their religion, they don't want to do it. So the people won in these cases. So I don't think this hurts us at all. I think that the liberals will try and use this against us. But I think at the end of the day, what the Supreme Court showed is regardless of where you're born and raised, what color you are, what gender you are going to be able to have individual freedom. And that's a win for the United States of America. It's a win for people, and I think we should all celebrate it.
All right, one of the other contenders in your race, former Vice President Pence, was here last week on Fox News Sunday. He reiterated his call that everybody in the field on the GOP side should commit to a nationwide ban on abortion at 15 weeks.
And so you see there, Shannon Bream followed up with a question about the 15-week abortion ban, didn't really follow up about any of her initial questions about the right to discriminate, how the Supreme Court had upheld the right to discriminate against LGBTQ people. I pretty much criticized that clip anyway, and so it was not a very good cross-examination, but I put it second, like I said, because I have more expectations of Dana Bash on CNN of doing a better cross-examination. This next clip, I mean, it's at least the initial questions that Margaret Brennan asks of Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg here about LGBTQ rights, explores the free speech rights of people who, don't want to endorse LGBTQ marriages or whatever. And so at least that's better cross-examination than you saw in the last two clips. Pete Buttigieg, I think, does a good job of explaining why the right to discriminate is says that, certain people don't have they're like second-class citizens. They can't get the businesses and services that other people aren't in one of these protected categories, one of these traditionally marginalized groups, that they just don't have the same rights as other Americans. That I mean, I have some criticisms of this case. It's all based on public accommodations law, where going back to the 60s, there were some important civil rights cases that said that like hotels and restaurants couldn't discriminate against black people because of civil rights laws passed by Congress. Those businesses didn't have a right to discriminate because it hurt like the right to travel. Like if you were there's that whole thing about like the Green Book and stuff, where African Americans had to like figure out places they could stay and eat and go to the bathroom if they just wanted to travel. And so public accommodation laws are really important. But then some states like expand that to, I mean, that's my one criticism of the Colorado law, is that is a website design company really a public accommodation? Like, if they don't serve everybody, is that really going to hurt the country as a whole? I think the Colorado public accommodations law might be a little too broad, but in terms of the right to discriminate and how it makes people second-class citizens, I do agree with Pete Buttigieg and the points he makes under some good cross-examination from Margaret Brennan in this clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
I know you were outspoken on Friday with the Supreme Court ruling in favor of a Colorado website designer. You called it discrimination. Justice Gorsuch said this was a First Amendment issue where all persons are free to think and speak as they wish, not as the government demands. What do you make of the argument that Colorado was labeling free speech as discrimination in order to censor it?
I think what's really revealing is that there's no evidence that this web designer was ever even approached by a same-sex couple looking for services to support their wedding. So you're seeing more and more of these cases and these circumstances that are designed to get people spun up and designed to chip away at rights. And I think the bigger picture here, when you look at the Supreme Court taking away a woman's right to choose, you look at Friday's decision diminishing the equality of same-sex couples, you look at a number of the decisions that have been made, they pose a question that is even deeper than these big cases. And the question is this: did we just live to see the high water mark of freedoms and rights in this country before they were gradually taken away? Because up until now, not uniformly, but overall, each generation was able to say that it enjoyed greater inclusion, greater equality, and more rights and freedoms than the generation before. And those decisions have added up and affected so many people, including me, of course, as I'm getting ready to go back to my husband and our twins for the rest of this morning, thinking about the fact that the existence of our family is only a reality because of a one-vote margin on the Supreme Court a few years ago. These are the kinds of things that are at stake. And we have a Supreme Court that is very much out of step with how most Americans view these issues.
But you know that conservatives are just framing this in a fundamentally different manner. Senator Ted Cruz described the Colorado law that would compel services be provided despite personal beliefs and put it this way, should a Muslim artist be compelled by the government to draw the image of Muhammad? Should Jewish artists be forced to create art that is anti-Semitic? Do you see merit in those comparisons that have to do specifically with free speech and freedom of religion?
Yeah, that's really not a comparison that is relevant to this case, but more importantly, I think it's really telling that you have to think of these far-fetched hypotheticals in order to justify decisions that are actually going to have much worse impacts in the real world. And I think this, again, goes back to the broader agenda of the culture wars that are being fired up.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time.
So yeah, that was a pretty good cross-examination, or I don't know, it was almost a direct examination in that it got the witness there to give his side of the story, his talking points or whatever. But I think Pete Buttigieg in general made a pretty good argument as to why this Supreme Court decision was actually pretty hurtful. And I pretty much pre-criticized that clip or talked about what I thought was important in there, and even my criticisms of the left-wing view on this particular case, the was it 303 case? I think I have the number right. The website designer from Colorado, Laurie Smith's case. And then the final clip I want to show you is, I think, the best cross-examination. This is Jon Karl on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they had on former Vice President Mike Pence. And this is a good cross-examination, even though Mike Pence never actually answers the question. But one of the really important parts of affirmative action, and I was talking about this earlier, is that I talked about part of this earlier, but one thing I didn't mention was that affirmative action, the racial discrimination or like the racial categories used in an affirmative action where you use race as a factor in determining hiring or entrance into college or whatever. One of the reasons it's upheld, even though it's a racial categorization that is prohibited by the 14th Amendment in most circumstances, is that the state has a compelling interest, or the state school or the private school or the college or university has a compelling interest in a diverse student body. And what Jon Karl is asking Mike Pence about here is, well, I mean, is it a problem? Is it a bad thing if colleges and universities can no longer create a diverse student body? This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where it's not about giving an unqualified person of a certain race acceptance into college because of their race. It's used just as a factor among many other factors to let a qualified person in who might not otherwise be let in. Because, Harvard or Yale or whatever, they could make up their entire student body out of qualified black applicants or qualified Asian applicants or qualified people from any of various states. So they have to choose between people based on multiple factors. And the Supreme Court, until this last week, said that these colleges and universities had a compelling interest in creating a diverse student body. Mike Pence is asked here on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos about whether that's even a bad thing if colleges and universities can't create diverse student bodies, like UCLA here in California, after we got rid of affirmative action, went from 7% black to 2% black. Is that a bad thing? And Mike Pence never answers the question, but Jon Karl makes it pretty obvious he won't answer the question, and even follows up with this great carve out about the military academies that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch this final newsmaker clip together over here.
I want to start with the big Supreme Court decisions, specifically the decision ending affirmative action as we know it. I understand you fully support this decision, but if the end result is that America's most selective colleges and universities have fewer Black and Hispanic students, is that a problem for America?
Well, look, I think I couldn't be more proud of the progress we've made toward a more perfect union in my lifetime. The Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s. And I think there was a time for affirmative action, John, where to open the doors of our colleges and universities to minority students, and particularly African Americans who may have been denied access. But I think those days are over. You know, it was Justice Sandra Day O'Connor who more than 20 years ago said that she thought affirmative action would go away in 25 years. It went away a little sooner than that. And I think that's a tribute to our minority students, the incredible accomplishments of African Americans and Asian Americans in this country, and Hispanic Americans, speaks for itself. And I really believe that the decision by the Supreme Court today was an acknowledgement of the incredible progress that minority Americans have made, their extraordinary educational achievements. And I have every confidence that that African Americans and other minority Americans are going to continue to compete and succeed in universities around the country, but we're going to do it with a colorblind society that I think is the aspiration of every American.
But respectfully, you didn't answer my question. We've seen what has happened in 9 states that have banned affirmative action. We've seen in Michigan and California and Florida that after affirmative action was done away with, the result was that you saw fewer Hispanic and Black students at their elite universities. So again, my question to you, if that is the result here, is that a concern? Is that a concern for you?
I just, look, I haven't seen your studies. I don't know the numbers. First job I ever had was as an admissions counselor at the college I graduated from. And I'm just very confident with the progress that we have made now in 2023, a fourth of the way through the 21st century, the achievements of African Americans, leaving aside the achievements of the first African American president, and African Americans all across the country. I'm just very confident that African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and other minorities are going to be able to compete and succeed. But we're going to be able to do it with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision in place. It will be judged not by the content, but judged by not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character and by our own academic performance.
So why did the court carve out the military academies? This ruling does not apply to our military academies. As Justice Jackson said, one standard for the boardroom, another standard for the bunker. Doesn't she have a case, a point there?
Well, this probably won't be the first time that I disagree with our newest justice, but John, come on. The American military, and you know, I've got 2 service members in our immediate family. The American military has been an instrument of advancing equality since virtually the founding of this country. I mean, there were African American officers in New England regiments in the Revolutionary War that we'll be celebrating on Independence Day, and the military has opened its door. You know, I celebrate, and I'm proud that we appointed him to the Joint Chiefs. I celebrate our new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first member to come up through the service ranks as an African American member of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Colin Powell preceded him, but came essentially from private life after a long career in the military. So I think the military's been a place where the doors have been open for a long time.
But sir,
minorities, and they've distinguished themselves with sacrifices and service for generations. I know they always will.
Totally understand all of what you just said, but this decision does not apply to the military academies. Under this decision, the military academies can still use race as a factor in admissions. Shouldn't, if you agree that this is the way it should be for universities across the country, should it also apply to the military academies? Why the carve-out?
Well, you know, I'd refer your viewers to the decision itself. And but I just have to tell you, I'm so pleased to see the Supreme Court so strengthened by 3 of the conservative justices that we appointed this week live up to, in this case and in other critical cases, a vision for this country that is really grounded in freedom and in the equality of opportunity for every American. So I'm very confident our military is going to continue to distinguish themselves and be that agent of opportunity for Americans of every background that want to put on the uniform of the United States. I respect the decisions that they make.
So let me ask you, you had also said that there is no place for discrimination based on race in the United States. I think everybody would absolutely agree with that. Do you also believe there is no place for discrimination based on sexual orientation?
And if you want to see how Jonathan Karl took on Mike Pence on the LGBTQ discrimination issue, down under sources in the video description, you can see the entire ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos episode. Like I said, I thought that was the cross-examination of the week, even though Mike Pence obviously never answered the question. Jonathan Karl made it pretty clear that he wasn't answering the question about whether lack of diversity on college campuses is a bad thing. He followed up pointing out that states like California and Florida, other states have outlawed affirmative action before this, and they saw a huge drop in the diversity of their student body. And Mike Pence still didn't answer. And then that was kind of, in some ways, it's kind of an ingenious follow-up about the military academies. I mean, it's a national security issue that we have a diverse military, so it doesn't become a haven of white supremacy, which has always been a problem with the U.S. military, like white Christian supremacy, especially the Air Force Academy is like worst of all, but I don't digress into that whole thing, but we have there's an important national security interest in continuing affirmative action in our armed forces. Mike Pence didn't really address that. We've done so well with diversification in our military. Well, then why is there a carve out for our military? I refer you to the opinion. Well, there's just a footnote in the opinion. There's no real explanation. That was a kind of bogus answer from Mike Pence. Maybe Jonathan Karl could have followed up a little better on that, but that last point, but otherwise it was definitely the best cross-examination of the week. That's my final newsmaker clip for you all. I hope you appreciate all the time and effort I put into creating this program. I appreciate all the live viewers who showed up. I saw I had one of the OG YouTubers, at least at the beginning of the program. I don't know if he's still watching, but I saw Coctopus Prime, which is such an OG YouTuber. I think he had his account get suspended for copyright violations and had to come back as Coctopus Prime. And yeah, he's been at YouTube from the beginning. He says he appreciates my live streams, and I appreciate all the viewers and the OG YouTube viewers. In some ways, I think my program has become more like the original Coctopus program, because my old videos, I never appeared on camera and I just did voiceovers between clips, and I never had I had my account suspended for a month near the beginning, but then I fought for fair use and kept my original channel, and now I do videos where I'm on camera, like Coctopus used to be on camera all the time talking about the news, and it's almost like my programs have become like the old Coctopus programs, or some other old OG YouTubers also, but I've in some ways changed my format more to match what people used to do when I was making off-camera videos. But anyway, maybe I'll have time to make off-camera videos in this holiday week or sometime in July, and coming up on I think is it my 17th anniversary in July? When did I start this channel? I'd have to look at my own channel here. Let me see, but when did look at the about on my channel, and it says that July 2nd, 2006. So oh yeah, yesterday was the 17th anniversary of when I created my YouTube channel, but it took me a while to upload videos. So anyway, maybe I will make some more old style videos, or make some videos between the Mondays, but I have committed to make the LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up every Monday between now and January 2025. covering the most important issues, covering the corporate news media and the Sunday morning news analysis shows. If you appreciate what I'm doing, right under the video, I put a couple ways you can support the channel financially through becoming a monthly patron on Patreon, which are like my most loyal, appreciated, supportive viewers, because Patreon, I think, gives me the best deal on. But there's also a PayPal link. PayPal gives a pretty good deal. Or if you want to support me and Google, the parent of, or I guess it's Alphabet, the parent of Google, the parent of YouTube, takes a big cut of the stuff you give through like super chats or through joining and becoming a member. I think there's a join button under the video. You can do any of those things if you want to support my efforts, all that I'm going to be continuing through January 2025. Maybe I'll have some reason to upload a video in the next week. Otherwise, I will be back next Monday, July 10th, to cover the Sunday morning news analysis shows. Watch your live comments, read the recorded show comments, and give my media criticism and political commentary. I hope you all appreciate it. I appreciate all of you. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet. Oh, and happy 4th of July tomorrow.